Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, February 3rd, 2026, and our dear friend John Helmer is here with us. Welcome back, John.
Thank you for having me, Nima. Good to see you again.
John, a lot to talk today, and let's start with the most crucial and important one, in my opinion, is the situation in the Middle East and the conflict
Yes.
between the United States and Iran. And for more than 3 weeks, we had some sort of turmoil going on in the Middle East, and the Trump administration did have built a big military power in the Middle East to confront Iran.
Mhm.
But looking at the current situation between the two parties, do you see the possibilities of a new war? Do you see something beyond that is happening? Because right now it seems that they want to negotiate, the two parties want to negotiate. How do you find the position of the American president, Donald Trump?
I think there'll be a permanent war against Iran. That's not going to change because of the fundamental dynamic with a nuclear-powered Israel that's expansionist and regards Iran as its principal enemy, having disposed of all the secular Arab states, but principally Saddam Hussein's Iraq, that were capable of not only defending against Israeli attack, including nuclear attacks. Saddam Hussein, there is a record of him talking to his generals about how Iraq could survive a nuclear attack and then counterattack. So Iran's the principal enemy of Israel, and that isn't going to change unless there were a significant regional agreement along the lines that Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, proposed as a mutual security pact for the Persian Gulf states. So there'll be permanent war. Right now, however, Trump's in retreat. He's in retreat actually on all fronts, including Iran, the Ukraine, and he's in retreat at home domestically. And we can get into that. The reason that he's in retreat, and this relieves Iran for the pressure right now. The task for the Iranian negotiators is to find a way of letting Trump retreat without making obvious that his tail is between his legs, that he's been defeated. He must always win, something we've said always before. But I've come up with a very simple formula for our audience to calculate the power balance in this situation and in others. It's money plus votes plus bullets equals power. If you're missing one or the other, you don't have the power. Now, money, to answer your question, the money's saying there's not going to be a war. The reason you can see it with the way the money is speaking in the oil markets. You can see that the Brent oil price marker and the West Texas Intermediate, the WTI US crude oil price marker, have been falling about 5% in the last 3 or 4 days. Now, the oil market is money talking, and the money is basically saying they see that the chance of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz or of a protracted defense, which Iran is capable of putting up, of a protracted war, that's diminished. So the price of oil is coming down. Why? Can Trump retreat in the face of the credible Iranian threat, no matter how much damage he says he's done? And remember, everyone should remember that he said he had obliterated, using that word 8 times in just a few minutes, the Iranian nuclear capacity. Why is he concerned? The answer is that come Memorial Day, which is only 16 weeks away on the US calendar, the summer driving season starts. Immediately, almost immediately afterwards, when American drivers need petrol or gas, benzene, depending on which country you and what name you use for the gas in your car. The Americans cannot go into the midterm election campaign, which starts during the summer, with a preoccupation of inflation in their cars and at home. And the fear of inflation is a major driver of public disapproval of Trump. So the money's saying there's not going to be a closure of Hormuz because there won't be a US attack. The votes are saying there's a collapse of Trump's support. And he can't risk the combination of casualties in war and inflation at home going into an election campaign. Just very briefly for our US audience, it's clear that Trump has retreated from Minneapolis. And I'm looking down at my notes to just look at the tweet in which he, I can't find it all of a sudden, in which he announced that ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement militaries that he sent into the cities of the country, the Democrat voting cities, and which resulted in 2 murders, as everybody understands, in Minneapolis. What Trump has announced is he's not going to send such militaries, neither the National Guard nor ICE, into what he calls the poorly governed Democrat cities unless they want them. This is a major retreat from the Democratic cities of the country. So, and that's driven by polls, and all White House staff act exactly the same, and they always must, because their lives and futures depend on it. When the votes go against you, when the money goes against you, you've only got bullets. And repression, military repression in the United States is something that maybe Stephen Miller goes to bed dreaming about in the Trump White House. But it's failing. It's failing. And the bullet calculation, and leave it to some of your guests to analyze the force ratios between Iran and the United States. The bullet ratio, or the numbers of bullets, the calculation is that the United States Armada, Trump's beautiful Armada, cannot win in a short war. Iran wins by surviving. Iran wins by withstanding and protracting war. Protracted war means the war comes home in the United States, and the combination of blood and inflation kills presidents. And it would do the same to Trump. So that combination, money, votes, and bullets, is now going against Trump, against his power. So the problem for those who are targeted, starting with Iran, is how to let him run away. And he's also been defeated in India. He's had to back down. We can go through a list as we go along, but I think that answers your question to start with. It's got to be a relief for everyone in Iran, where you are now, and it's got to be a relief of common sense. It's certainly a relief in Moscow that this is that there will be no US attack, but it doesn't mean, having been defeated 3 times, that he won't come again, or that the Israelis have dropped their strategy, which ultimately requires the destruction of Iran.
John, we see that Turkey and other West Asian countries are trying to somehow communicate with both parties, Iranians and with the United States. How do you see the role of these countries in the region, and how does Iran see them? Does Iran see them as, somehow collaborating with the United States, or as time goes by, Iran sees them as, political players in the region that can be influential on the decision of the United States?
Well, you can answer the second part, how Iran views. I spent a lot of my political life working with the Prime Minister of Greece, and so I have a particular view about Turkey. And that view is shared in Moscow by the General Staff and the intelligence services. No one trusts President Erdogan, and no one trusts Turkey to be an ally. There are a number of reasons. We don't necessarily have to give a Putin-style lecture, which is boring for everybody. The role of the Turks at the moment is to position themselves as a credible place for mediation. This doesn't. They are in the process of trying to legitimize the expansion of the old Turkish empire southwards along the Lebanese coast, which they've succeeded so far in doing to a degree with the installation of President al-Sharaj, President Jalani in Damascus. But then Jalani, Shara, the two names he uses, needs to seek Russian and other diversified support against Turkish expansion. Turkey's also expanding across the Mediterranean against Cyprus, against Greece, towards Libya. It's an expansionist power. It wants to position itself in ways that are entirely deceptive, especially in support of Gaza against the genocide, and so on. I think I've said enough about the Turks. About the Arabs, something quite interesting happened to answer your question. On January the 31st, so only a couple of days back, India managed to call a summit meeting of the Arab states. There was a summit meeting of all the Arab foreign ministers plus the Secretary General of the Arab League. All of them assembled in Delhi, which was something that the Indians pulled off that the Russian side could not achieve when they tried to have a summit meeting of the Arabs, and Trump upstaged them with his Sharm el-Sheikh performance. What is interesting about this collection of the Arab states is the communique. And it's called the Delhi Declaration of the Second. I'm looking down at my notes, so I give you exactly what was said so everyone can understand how to interpret it. The Delhi Declaration of the Second India-Arab Foreign Ministers Meeting. Now, what I've done is simply check. There isn't a single mention of Iran, not one mention of the principal threat to the Gulf states, and further westward to Jordan, of a war between the United States, Israel, and Iran that would impact them all. Not a single mention. Israel is only mentioned once in a formula for peace with Israel, Palestine peace with Israel. There's zero mention of Russia. There is zero mention of nuclear weapons in the Middle East. There is zero mention of BRICS, and yet Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Iran are all members of BRICS. And so I think part of the answer to your question is when the Arab states assembled in Delhi with the Indians, they were unable to address the most immediate and urgent threats to themselves. They're too divided. Now, I spent a couple of years working with and in the office of the Secretary General of the Arab League. I've got a fair idea of how it works and how it doesn't work, how hobbled, how internally competitive. Now, Ahmed Abul Gheit is the current Egyptian Secretary General, as the League always was run by Secretary General, except for my period when it was a Tunisian. This is an indication, this communique, of how divided they are. Not to mention the crucial conflict now between Saudi Arabia and the United Emirates, involving Yemen, involving the Sudan and Somalia. These are crucial conflicts that have reached kinetic dimension, and yet the League and the ministers could not discuss them to any point of agreement. So that tells us, doesn't it, as answer your question, the Arab states are too divided to come to the table and agree. However, it is of interest. Why didn't Ayatollah Khamenei say the other day in his speech, February 1 speech, when he was talking about the inevitability of regional war were Iran to be attacked? Why not say there should be a regional representation in the negotiations? Isn't it a regional settlement that addresses the root causes of the conflict against Iran? Root causes is a formula, you know, our audience remembers, is the way in which the Russians express their intention that the peace deal on the Ukraine must address the root causes of insecurity for everyone. So it hasn't been said on the Iranian side there should be regional representation at the peace table. We can get into that. But still, the problem is the principal Arab states are now at war with one another, almost at war, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. Saudi Arabia has made a particular kind of operational pact with Pakistan and with the United States to support its perception of its insecurity. On the other hand, the United Emirates has gone to India and made a pact with the Indians for long-term defense and security purposes. So you can see there's a lineup there, but it's an antagonistic lineup. Now, if this is the perception of the Arab states between each other, the most powerful ones being Saudi Arabia, which has always dominated the Arab League, and the United Emirates, and now they're at daggers drawn, literally. And now that one side takes Pakistan as a mercenary force, as a potential supplier of nuclear weapons, and the other side, the Emiratis, take the Indian support, then what do we have here? An impossibility that the regional Arab states can be brought into the kind of relationship with Iran that would reduce the current pressure from the United States. On the other hand, everybody can see the press. There's lots of press speculation and reporting that that all of the Arab states have begged President Trump not to attack.
Yeah. John, two aspects of what's going on in the mind of Arab states together with Turkey, in my opinion, is that because if Donald Trump could have, convinced these Arab states and Turkey that it could be a quick war, because they have managed to do something inside Iran with the protests then turning into riots and destabilizing the government from within, then coming from outside and attacking Iran. It was all, the plan, in my opinion, was that. And it doesn't seem that the current, evaluation, assessment on the part of the intelligence, on the part of the military experts in these countries is that the United States can attack Iran and could achieve something in a short period of time. That's the problem. Because if it turns to a war of attrition, I don't think that the United States would be able to continue the war in the Middle East, because he's confronting a country that is producing everything here inside the country, and they have to bring everything to the region. And Israel is not that capable of producing that much of weapons and ammunition and all of that. They are all dependent on the United States. It has come from the United States coming to the region. I don't see Turkey playing a big role in that, producing and providing the United States with that ammunition. That's why the solution for the United States is not a continuous war, not just domestically, but internationally, considering the whole region.
Well, let me ask you, tell me how the Iranian side thinks of Turkey, other than a stopping place to have meetings in Istanbul. How does Iran see Turkey? Potentially hostile, always potentially hostile, potentially friendly? What side would Turkey take with the Kurds in its war against the Kurds, in its occupation of Syria? How do you see the Iranian side thinking of Turkey's role? And then we could come to the other side of Iran, because Pakistan is now coming to a point of collapse in Baluchistan. But let me understand, please, how you see Turkey.
Turkey today, John, is different from Turkey it was before. Turkey that was before the conflict, the fall of Assad in Syria. The
Yes.
situation in Syria has influenced tremendously the position of Turkey in the region, because they now are their main, somehow we can so-called enemy in Syria is Israel. They have to
Yes.
keep that in the background of their mind. That's why
Yes.
here the analysis, the assessment on the part of Iranian is that Turkey doesn't want a new conflict. Turkey sees what has happened in Syria. They thought that they could benefit from the chaos in Syria, but they're not benefiting from that. As time goes by, the situation is getting more complicated. That's why they know, because the position, as you know, the position of Iran and Turkey on Gaza is totally different. Iran wants, they want to support Gaza and the people of Palestine, and Turkey wants something else totally different from what Iran wants. That's why many people don't in Iran, I'm talking about the popular, the opinion, the public opinion, people don't trust Erdogan. But the
No.
government, by the way, the policy of the government, the official policy is different somehow, because they want to communicate, they want to verify what is the position of Turkey on each and every issue as time goes by, and these negotiations are somehow shaping in the Middle East. That is, there's somehow they want to verify Turkey as time goes by. And we know, after all, the public opinion is not that much optimistic about Turkey. That's a fact about Turkey, not Turkish people, the Turkish government under Erdogan.
Of course. Well, tell me, to what role did, as I understood it, as I've read it, but I'm a long way away and you're right there, what role did the Kurds play, or Kurdish factions play, in the the attempted internally driving regime change that's just been defeated? As I understood it, the Kurds in the west of Iran, from Syria and from Turkish border areas, played an anti-regime role, but were defeated. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's what has happened. And actually, the Kurds are the key to connect, to somehow bring these two countries, Turkey and Iran, together, because they see them not only in Iran, but in Turkey. They see them as a destabilizing, force within the country. That's the problem for both countries. They have to bring these people under the control of the government.
Right.
And this is a common ground for both countries, for both Iran and Turkey to work on, in my opinion. And what has happened, John, here in Iran, it was somehow amazing to see. And I think Turkey, together with Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia, one side, you see, they said that they're not going to support any US attack on Iran, and they're not going to let the United States using their airspace to attack Iran. And then you see the Zionist sort of media trying to manipulate that. The foreign minister of Saudi Arabia went to the United States. They said behind the scenes that you can attack. We are totally agreeing on the attack on Iran. It was somehow the government in Israel is not happy with what's going on in the Middle East. They see how the Middle East is changing drastically. The sea change, in my opinion, is happening. It's not all on the scene to see that. It's not on the surface. It's below the surface mostly. And I see a tremendous change happening in the Middle East. I see all of these countries. You meant the most Zionist government in the Middle East is the government in UAE, in the
Yeah.
UAE, United Arab Emirates. And the other countries are somehow frightened by Israel because they know how Israel can behave, you know, in a way that they may threat the government in any of these countries, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, and Turkey
Mm.
has is under a lot of pressure, both in Syria and in the Middle East. They have done everything, in my opinion, to de-escalate the situation between Iran and the United States, and they're
Mm.
trying to do as we talk.
Mm. Okay, thanks. Mm.
And John, the other point, in my opinion, when it comes to the Middle East, is that the you've mentioned the situation that Donald Trump is facing in the United States, but how the other part, the other dimension of the conflict would be the way that the United States could put pressure on India. India is important both for Iran and for Russia. India, Iran is, importing Indian rice. Indian rice, one of the main elements of the Iran, the products that Iran imports is rice. And I don't know if something like 50% it comes from India, and the United States tried to impose sanctions on India. That's why India has decided not to send, rice to Iran. That would put a lot of pressure on the government and to manage the situation with that product. It's so important for the Iranian people. And on the other hand, they put pressure on India in order to, to avoid any new purchases of Russian oil.
Yes.
How is that going to work for the United States? Do you think that the government in India would somehow accept this sort of pressure and somehow try to accommodate to get closer to Donald Trump and his position, or they're gonna see the threat by these sort of flip-flop policies on the part of the Trump administration, considering both Russia and Iran, and maybe eventually China?
This is a very important question because it's very new, and our sort of American-centric podcasting omits to understand that the world isn't US-centered when we're talking about India, China, Iran, and Russia, as we are. Over the last few days, some very significant changes have occurred. And let me just say that, to remind everyone, in December, President Putin went to Delhi and had a very creative, productive, friendly set of summit meetings with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and reached a new level of strategic partnership. A week ago, the European Union delegation, led by Mrs. von der Leyen, came and signed a major new trade agreement with India, which both sides called the mother of all trade agreements, which allowed India at the time to diversify its trade that was being heavily penalized by Trump administration, diversify it in the European direction, increase European investment in India, pardon me, and increase labor mobility. Remember that the Trump administration has slammed on not only penalty tariffs on India, but penalties on Indian workers and Indian highly skilled, technologically skilled individuals who've been punished and excluded from the visa program that they've enjoyed, that established a very large Indian diaspora in the United States. The Europeans have come up with an alternative. The Russians have also come up with an alternative labor mobility plan, as well as a military mobility plan for Indian use of Russian bases and vice versa. So everybody around India has accepted the diversification seen it as an impetus to investment in Indian GDP growth, and sees the long-term future of Indian diaspora in their politics. Now, in the last 48 hours, what's happened? First, President Trump has suddenly announced by tweet that he has reached a major agreement. I'm looking down at the text of the tweet, announcing a new fundamental shift in US policy towards India, which has been extremely hostile and penalty inflicting for months. Now he says, Trump, and I'm reading the tweet, "It was an honor to speak with Prime Minister Modi this morning. He is one of my greatest friends and a powerful and respected leader of his country. We spoke about many things, including trade and ending the war with Russia and Ukraine. He's agreed to stop buying Russian oil and to buy much more from the United States, potentially Venezuela. This will help end the war in Ukraine." It goes on. President Modi has responded with a tweet saying, and I'm just flipping my page so I get the language right. "Wonderful to speak with my dear friend President Trump today. Delighted that made in India products will now have a reduced tariff of 18%. Now, 18% is 1 percentage point less than the US strategic friend Pakistan. Pakistan faces a 19% tariff. So all of a sudden, the US, as it were, orientation to Pakistan as a war-fighting platform against India to the east and against Iran to the west, that orientation seems to have changed. And it coincides with a rebellion, a very significant breakout of violence in Baluchistan, which is borders Iran, Afghanistan. It's a province or a region of Pakistan, and has had significant independence movement. The Baluchistan Liberation Army has been a significant military force, and it has now produced a highly coordinated series of attacks across Baluchistan, from north to south to the Indian Ocean, from east to west. And the Pakistan army is having significant trouble, not very well publicized, in containing it. Now, at this moment, for the United States to take India's side when Pakistan is busy blaming India for the Baluchistan violence and the rise of the BLA, means the US appears to have switched against its own ally, Pakistan. That also undermines the US-Saudi-Pakistan alliance against the Emirates, Russia, and India. So you have suddenly a high degree of instability around India, in which India is the pivot. And Trump has had to retreat from his tariff penalties. Now, we can go into the question of what does the Indian promise to buy less Russian oil or no Russian oil actually mean. I've done some calculations which have been helped by Indian sources and Russian sources, and I'm turning around looking for my papers to explain that the actual loss of Indian buying of oil over time may be offset by an agreement reached over time, let's say over the next 2 years, between the Putin administration, the Trump administration, to relieve Russia of sanctions, including the sanction against sale of oil to China and India. Remember that Trump himself relieved China of the penalty sanction for buying Russian oil. He's now insisting that on India's promise, but India's promise was explained to President Putin in December. And the issue there, it's complicated on both the Russian and the Indian side because the two sides are deeply and for the long term connected strategically as military suppliers and mutual security supporters of each other. However, there has been a serious problem in Russian desire to sell oil, but only for dirhams or dollars. The Indian side have proposed that they will buy Russian oil for rupees, and those rupees should be invested in India as Russian investment, which is far less than the US, the Chinese, and other states the Europeans have in India, and that the rupee should become a reserve currency of the central bank in Moscow. That's opposed by the Russian central bank. So there is factional difference in Moscow of how closely to tie Russian oil sales and currency to India. And that's a problem the Russians haven't solved yet. So these are not splitting. This is not wedge driving, no matter what Trump thinks, between India and Russia. The new trade agreement will not mean that Indians will suddenly turn around and buy F-35s. That's not likely to happen, not that particular weapon system. There are a range of US weapon systems which India would like to buy or has already purchased, but it is committed now to 140 odd Rafales, French fighters, in its diversified Air Force planning for the future. It's also still talking with Russia for the Sukhoi 57. So there's no sign that Trump is hoping for, or some parts of the US administration are hoping for this new improvement between Trump and Modi, initiated by Trump, not by Modi, initiated by Trump. It's a retreat by Trump away from his hostility to India. There's no sign that this will drive a wedge between either India and China. There's already a wedge there, or between India and Russia. That's not going to happen. Indeed, over the next few months, what will develop are the terms of an Indian-American trade agreement, which has been in planning and in negotiation for years, but interrupted by the hostilities of not only Trump, but US Treasury Secretary Bassett and others. So what can we say to sum up? It's that there is great flux that's not working. You've just said it about the Middle East. I've just tried to show that the Baluchistan fight for independence, which begins the total breakup of Pakistan, there's great flux between these states. India has won its most recent war against Pakistan after they attacked the Pahalgam terrorist attack of last year in the Kashmir. India is constantly on alert to deal with proxy terrorism to undermine India internally. It's also got significant border conflict potential with the Chinese, and it's got a perception that the US is meddling in Bangladesh and Nepal in the east. So the perception of the US as an enemy of the Modi government and of internal Indian cohesion, that perception remains. But all of a sudden, in the last 48 hours, Trump changes. Trump retreats from those positions. That creates a great flux for which there's factional support in India, there's factional support in Washington, and Russia has to express its concerns and maintain its common interest with India. but there's much less predictability this week than there was last week, or when I was in Delhi, let's say in November, or when President Putin was in Delhi in December. So what are we saying here? We're saying that in a situation that the US can't control, it's retreating. And it's just retreated from the rising superpower, India. And that, of course, has waves heading in your direction. Will there be greater freedom for India to trade against the sanctions policies, including the sanctions policy against Iran?
Yeah. John, when it comes to the negotiations, we have Steve Witkoff negotiating each and every, issue on considering the
Yes.
foreign policy of the United States. When it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff is there to manage all of that, to negotiate all of that. What is the experience? What can we learn from what he has done so far to consider the ongoing negotiations, both with Iran, because it seems that Iran and the United States gonna start negotiating on Friday. It seems that Steve Witkoff gonna be in Istanbul talking with Arakchi, the foreign minister of Iran.
Yes.
We have the experience coming from the negotiations, ongoing negotiations, continuous negotiations between the United States and Russia. What can Iran learn from that process?
I'm very surprised, in answer to your question, that Iran doesn't remind everybody that Witkoff is not an acceptable intermediary. He's not a mediator. He's not a negotiator. He was a deception operation in the preparation of the US-Israeli attack that turned into the 12-day war of last June, which killed from the start a significant number of Iranian generals, military commanders. Witkoff is responsible for the deceptions that were the preliminary to that war. Now, since ancient times, what does the party that's been deceived by the messenger do with the messenger when he shows up again? Answer: they cut off his head, put it in a basket, and they send his head back to his principal as a message: we don't trust this messenger you've sent. Find another one who doesn't betray his word. There is no point in negotiating a messenger with a messenger who doesn't honor his word. And Witkoff has proved that more clearly with Iran than he's proved with Russia. He will meet with Mr. Arakchi in Istanbul at the end of this week. He's also going to be in Abu Dhabi when the next round of meetings happen with the Russian side on the Ukraine, February 4 and 5th. And he's just been in Israel, and he's shuttling between the three. Which side does he represent? Well, it's perfectly obvious that he represents Israel, along with Jared Kushner, and the third member that is part of this team. His name's Joshua Gruenbaum. Gruenbaum and Kushner are both adepts of the Chabad, the fundamentalist missionary movement, the Jewish movement that used to be based in New York, has become a worldwide missionary movement to revive a Jewish civilization, Jewish values, Jewish religion, and it has its important political application in support of the Netanyahu policies. That's Kushner, that's Gruenbaum. In addition, they are part of the Gaza real estate redevelopment. Now, let's just go to a couple of things that Witkoff represents that the Russian side understands that everyone else doesn't perhaps quite understand. He's a bag man. He carries and accepts bribes for the Trump family. This is how it works. This is why Kirill Dmitriev is the Russian representative for business relations, who was in Miami on Saturday negotiating with Witkoff, Bessent, Grunbaum, and Kushner. The deal is this. It's the Russian side thinks, and this is what my sources tell me, that the $200+ billion in Russian central bank cash that was frozen at the beginning of the conflict has all but been matched by the rise in the value of Russian gold reserves. So in a sense, it's been compensated in Russia's sovereign reserve value by the rise of gold. Therefore, the Russian side thinks we'll let Dmitriev use the 200 billion plus as a lure to get the US into an agreement in which there would be a vast investment fund. Call this a Russian privatization of the sovereign reserve that's currently frozen. If Dmitriev said in Miami, you can extract our reserves from Euroclear and the European countries that have frozen the reserves and aim to use them and are using them to fund the war in Ukraine. You pull them out, we will agree to putting $1 billion into President Trump's BOP fund for Gaza. We will agree to assigning some of the money, small amounts, for Western Ukraine post-settlement. We will agree that the rest of the money would be invested in a fund overseen and managed by Dmitriev on the Russian side, Witkoff and his sons, Trump and his sons, and his son-in-law, Kushner. This would then be a multi-billion-dollar investment fund privatized from the Russian central bank reserves that were frozen, and then used for projects that will be celebrated, much as Trump celebrates the BOP, for all sorts of projects for benefit, or peaceful benefit of both Russia and Ukraine. Now, in those sorts of projects, management fees, margins, all sorts of profitability drops off the truck, so to speak, and that's where the bribes are. That's where the inducements to the Trump family, the Witkoff family, the Lutnick family, all the families that rule Washington will get rich at this fund. Okay, that's why Dmitriev negotiates with Witkoff. That's why President Putin has had Witkoff to the Kremlin several times. The theory on the Russian side is that presidents of the United States can be bribed. The experience, especially of the Clinton family, is that Americans don't honor the terms of their agreement. But this formula essentially puts Trump family and the Russian side through Dmitriev in control of these reserves, in the belief that, and this argument's put in Moscow, they'll do a better job with investing the money than Elvira Nabiullina, the central bank governor who let the money go, would do if the central bank got the money back. That's the theory of negotiating with that particular individual. On the other hand, the Russian side thinks no better of Witkoff than you do. Therefore, who is the real negotiator of security arrangements, of an end of war, an armistice, of a territorial settlement, security guarantees for the Ukraine? That's Admiral Kostyakov of the head of the GRU, the Military Intelligence Service, and General Fomin. Those are the two generals, call them Admiral and General, who are negotiating for the Russian side in Abu Dhabi. They were in the first session. They will be again in Abu Dhabi tomorrow. Witkoff can be there. Kushner can be present, as they were the first round, but their presence is not exactly related to the security. The idea on the Russian side is that Witkoff persuades Trump it's in their interest, their economic interest, their commercial interest, their pocket interest, to agree on the military terms, the security terms. That's why Witkoff is there. Now, what value does Witkoff present to the Iranian side in Istanbul? It's different, isn't it? It's remarkably different. That's why I've said, why doesn't the Iranian side insist on seeing Admiral Brad Cooper? He's the general in command of the Central Command that's responsible for the Armada attacking Iran. The Russian side was negotiating, Kostyakov and Fomin, with General Grinkevich. Who's he? He's the head of European Command and Supreme Allied Commander Europe. He's responsible for the operations in which the United States controls the Ukraine and the battlefields from the Ukraine through Germany northwards to Finland and what have you. If the Russian side says, we believe the only way to negotiate a durable armistice, peace, postponement of war, or better, is a US general, then I'm surprised the Iranian side hasn't said, Witkoff, bring Cooper next time. Make it, and we will have general to general negotiations.
John, how do you see the role of China in both, considering Ukraine and in the Middle East? We've seen China, somehow they're not that shy to show their position, to show their policy in both in Ukraine and in the Middle East. They have trying to be more calm and not that much getting involved, but behind the scene, or as we thought, considering the weapons, considering the policies, considering all of that, where is China today? And considering what it was, because as I can say, here in Iran, you see the position of the official position of the Iranian government tremendously changing. Iran and Russia are in a partnership. They're somehow so close, I can say, that I could have not imagined it before, that Iran and Russia can get this close. And how do you see China in that calculation?
Well, I have to plead that I'm not a China expert, and I can only say that I've seen happily and interestingly Russia-Chinese relations at all sorts of negotiating levels in which I was involved directly or involved as a briefer in China with Chinese investment banks on Russian risk. So I've got a fair idea of how the two sides see each other, at least in business. What I'm not capable of talking about is the purge that's underway between President Xi and the Central Military Commission, the commanders of the Chinese military, and the relation between the military, the Communist Party, and President Xi's Politburo. That's a subject I respectfully decline to answer because I don't know enough, but I hear and listen to all sorts of discussions of it. About that matter, the Chinese are extremely shy and quiet. About that matter, there was a conversation, a video conference announced by the Russian Defense Ministry, in which the Russian Defense Minister, Mr. Belousov, had a video conference call with, I believe, the Chinese Defense Minister's name is Dong Jun. Pardon me if I made a mistake in pronunciation or naming, and in which the obvious agenda was what the hell is going on in China? That would have been the Russian question. How well Russian intelligence, how well the Russian relationship with China, how well the Xi-Putin relationship can enable each side to say frankly what's going on, I don't know. What I can say is that there's considerable uncertainty now about Chinese capability to project military power. And all of a sudden we're seeing very well-spoken US-educated Chinese professors appearing in the podcast universe doing a reasonable job of convincing us that, that China can project both military power and commercial power. Well, let's just put it this way. Chinese were unable to project any deterrent power in Venezuela during the Trump confrontation. They were the last backer of President Maduro to appear and hold his hand before the United States grabbed him the next day. The US delayed its attack on Maduro until the Chinese delegation had left town. I don't see that the Chinese support of Pakistan, for example, proved to be at all effective in protecting Pakistan after it initiated the exchange of violence with India. Indian Army, Indian military, Indian Air Force counterattack with greater effect than the Chinese capabilities of Pakistani command and control. I know there's some folks out there in the audience that disagree with me. It's not the time to argue the evidence, but this can be argued from the evidence. The question then becomes the one you asked. To what degree does China act for Iran in deterring US attack? We know that Russian air defense, missile defense, electronic defense, and coordination of defenses has dramatically improved, as your generals have said, dramatically improved Iran's ability to deter a US-Israeli attack. What about China? What has China done to increase the deterrent capability? Now, we know that in the last few days, there's been a joint Chinese, Russian Navy, Iranian Navy exercise, live fire, in the Sea of Oman, with missile shooting range, not with artillery shooting range of the US Armada. We know there's been that kind of common exercise before. We know that when the Chinese show up to project naval power, they do it with 2 vessels. They don't do it with more. And they sail away again. What's the capability of China to add to your side's capacity to deter the Americans? Why don't you tell me whether the Iranian side thinks that the Chinese side has military projection capability for deterrent effect? I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah. It seems, by the way, that China is providing Iran with those sort of weapons, you know. It seems to me. I have no information on that to confirm that, but as the atmosphere between the two, Iran and China, is totally 100% positive. It seems that they're getting closer and closer as time goes by. And you mentioned the operation, the exercises, naval exercises, these 3 countries, is going to be at the end of February this month. Yeah. Mm-hmm. John, it was a great talk, as always, and we've learned a lot from your point of view, and we appreciate your information, your understanding of the conflict in the region, in the West Asia and in Eurasia, in Ukraine. Thank you so much, as always.
Thank you for having me, Nima. Looking forward to more news breaking between now and when we meet each other again next week. There's been an awful lot happening this last few days. And with a bit of luck, we'll be right enough that we will not be talking about a US attack on Iran next week. So thanks for having me. Looking forward.
See you soon, John.
Thank you.